Okay, so imagine this scenario. Like, you're about to have a baby,
Oh,
and with just, a little genetic tweaking, you could, like, up their chances of being, like a star athlete, or
right.
maybe even make sure they're, like, musically gifted.
Oh, wow.
It sounds kind of wild, right?
It does sound a little bit like we're stepping into the world of designer babies.
Yeah.
But it is true, this technology is getting closer and closer every day.
It's true, and it's a bit of a Pandora's box, isn't it?
It is.
We're talking about PGT-P.
Right.
This new kind of genetic testing that analyzes IVF embryos to, like, predict the likelihood of certain traits.
Yeah, and that's where I think the big debate comes in.
Yeah.
Because it's not about editing genes.
Right.
It's about selecting embryos based on their genetic markers.
Yeah.
And that brings in a whole bunch of ethical questions.
Think of it like this. Instead of just testing for, serious genetic diseases,
Right.
we're now kind of peering into the genetic crystal ball,
Yeah.
trying to predict things like, a person's height, their intelligence, even their eye color.
Yeah.
And today we're going to dive into this complicated issue, but through a specific lens,
Okay.
Islamic ethics.
This is fascinating to me because Islam has this really rich history when it comes to science and medicine,
Yeah.
often encouraging exploration, but also emphasizing ethical boundaries.
That's what I find so interesting about it. It's not, black and white, like science is good or science is bad.
Right.
It's all about understanding the nuances.
Absolutely. Seeking knowledge is so deeply valued in Islam. It's almost a spiritual obligation.
I was reading about this the other day.
Yeah.
There's a verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Nisa's verse 113,
Yeah.
where it talks about Allah teaching us what we didn't know.
Yes.
It's almost like this divine call to explore
Yeah.
and understand the world around us.
Exactly. And it goes hand in hand with the fact that Islam places so much importance on a strong and healthy population, not just physically,
Yeah.
but intellectually as well.
Right.
And, Surah Al-Qasas, verse 26,
Okay.
talks about strength and trustworthiness.
Okay.
And these are qualities that contribute to a thriving society. And they often stem from both physical and intellectual capabilities.
So we have this foundation of, knowledge seeking, this
Yeah.
emphasis on a thriving community.
Yes.
But then we come to PGT-P, the possibility of like selecting, certain traits in our children. It raises a whole bunch more questions.
It does. And that's where Islamic jurisprudence sort of comes in.
Okay.
It offers this framework for approaching these new ethical dilemmas.
It's like having a moral compass to guide us through uncharted territory.
It is. And one of the tools in that compass
Yeah.
are the 5 principles known as qawa'id fiqhiyyah.
Okay.
These are essential in Islamic ethics.
So let's unpack these principles.
Uh,
What's the first one?
The first one is qawa'id,
Okay.
which means intention.
Okay.
So in the case of PGT-P, we have to ask ourselves,
Yeah.
what is the driving force behind using this technology? Are we trying to prevent suffering?
Yeah.
Or are we crossing a line by trying to design our children
Right.
with desirable traits just because we prefer them?
So it's about digging deeper into the why behind our actions.
Exactly.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What's next?
Next principle is yaqın,
Okay.
and that centers on certainty.
Okay.
Essentially, it's about how reliable PGT-P actually is. Can we really be certain about the outcomes
Right.
when we're dealing with something as complex as genetics?
Because it's not like baking a cake.
Right.
Where you know exactly what you're going to get if you follow the recipe right.
No, it's far more intricate than that.
Yeah.
You can analyze the genes and make predictions, but there's always a degree of uncertainty.
Right.
One gene can influence multiple traits.
Right.
Environmental factors also play a role.
So it's more like trying to predict the stock market. You have lots of data,
Yeah.
potential for gains,
Yeah.
but also inherent risks and unknowns.
Exactly. And that uncertainty goes directly into our next principle,
Okay.
which is ḍarar,
Okay.
which focuses on harm.
Yeah.
If we're not 100% certain about the science
Yeah.
and the long-term effects,
Right.
are we risking unintended consequences
Right.
by using PGT-P for non-medical trait selection?
That's a huge question.
It is.
It makes you think about those unintended consequences.
Yeah.
What about our fourth principle?
The fourth principle is ḍarūra,
Okay.
which translates to necessity.
Okay.
So it prompts us to consider, is using PGT-P for trait selection actually essential,
Yeah.
or is it more of an elective enhancement? This is especially relevant when we think about the fact that Islamic teachings prioritize the well-being of the whole community.
It forces us to grapple with those tough questions. What's a need versus a want?
Right.
Especially when we're dealing with something as potentially impactful as altering the genetic makeup of future generations.
It is.
What about our last principle?
The final principle is urf,
Okay.
which emphasizes custom.
Okay.
So it's about cultural norms and values.
Got it.
So how does this idea of selecting traits in our children sit with our understanding of what it means to be human, to be a parent,
Yeah.
to embrace the diversity of life?
Wow. That's a lot to unpack.
It is.
It seems like this technology really challenges our perceptions of what's ethically acceptable,
It does.
especially when we're viewing it through the lens of Islamic teachings.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this so important to talk about.
It's not just about the science itself, it's the ethical considerations that come along with it.
Exactly.
It seems like Islamic scholars have a very well-defined framework
They do.
for navigating these really complex issues,
Right.
which is incredibly relevant in today's world.
It really is. It's a testament to the wisdom of those teachings,
Yeah.
offering guidance even as we deal with these unprecedented advancements in science and technology.
Fascinating stuff. So we have these 5 guiding principles from Islamic jurisprudence
Right.
to help us navigate this ethical maze.
Yeah.
Let's go back to our first principle, intention.
Okay.
In the context of PGT-P,
Okay.
it seems like there's this fine line between using this technology for good,
Right.
preventing genetic diseases, and maybe overstepping by like trying to handpick desirable traits.
Yeah. That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Islam teaches that Allah created humans in the best of forms.
Right.
And there's a verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Tin, in verse 4, that says,
Okay.
surely we created man in the best of molds.
Okay.
So it kind of suggests that there's this sanctity to the way that we're naturally made.
Right. Like trying to improve on a masterpiece
Right.
might actually like diminish its value.
Exactly. And Surah Al-Nisa, verse 119,
Okay.
actually cautions against trying to change Allah's creation.
Okay.
And even associates it with like the actions of Satan.
Wow.
So it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
does using PGT-P to choose certain traits in our children
Right.
fall into that category of tampering with the natural order?
That's a powerful connection to make.
Yeah.
It's not just about the technology itself,
Right.
but the thought behind it, you know?
Exactly.
It makes me think about those stories of people who win the lottery
Right.
and then their lives just kind of go totally crazy.
Yeah.
Like maybe there's wisdom in accepting life's natural course.
It's something to think about.
It really is.
And it goes into our next principle, certainty.
Okay.
Because even if our intentions are good,
Right.
how much can we really control when it comes to something as complex as genetics?
Right. Because even with all the genetic testing in the world,
Right.
we can't predict every little detail of how a person's life will go, can we?
No, not at all. PGT-P can identify genetic markers
Mm-hmm.
that are associated with certain traits,
Okay.
but it's not a perfect system.
Yeah.
Genes interact in complicated ways.
Right.
Environmental factors have a big role.
Yeah.
It's like, think about those navigation apps.
Okay.
They can usually get you like close to your destination,
Right.
but sometimes you still have to make adjustments along the way.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It highlights how much control we don't have.
Right.
Even with this advanced technology.
Right.
We can get information
Yeah.
and make educated guesses,
Yeah.
but life is going to do what it's going to do.
Exactly. And that lack of being certain
Right.
goes right into our next principle,
Okay.
ḍarar, which is the idea of harm.
Okay.
Because if we're making these huge life decisions
Right.
based on information that's incomplete,
Right.
there's always that risk of unintended consequences.
Because if we're too focused on selecting for certain traits
right.
that we think are good right now,
Exactly.
are we potentially like messing with the gene pool in a way that could be really bad later on?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like they say, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
Because what we think is a good gene today
Mm-hmm.
might not be so great
Right.
in a different environment or as humans change, you know?
Yeah.
And this all ties into this bigger issue of genetic diversity.
Right.
Imagine if everyone was tall
Okay.
and athletic,
Yeah.
super smart.
Right.
Sounds good on paper, right?
Right.
But what if
Yeah.
some new virus comes along
Oh.
that specifically targets people with those genes?
Oh, wow.
Suddenly that lack of diversity is a huge problem.
Wow. It really makes you think about how connected everything is. Like we might think we're just picking like one trait or two.
Right.
But those choices could like snowball into something much bigger,
I-
affecting the whole human gene pool.
It really is a humbling thought, and it brings us back to that principle of necessity.
Right, ḍarar.
Exactly.
When we're talking about something as big as this,
Yeah.
shaping the genetic makeup of the future,
Yeah.
we really have to stop and think, is this really necessary?
We do.
Especially when we know there are risks.
Right.
And there are other ways to, help kids thrive and develop.
Right. Other ways that don't have these ethical dilemmas.
Exactly.
And this leads us to our last principle, IRF.
Okay. Cultural norms and values.
Exactly. Because this isn't just a scientific debate
Right.
or even just a religious one.
Yeah, it's about society as a whole.
It is how would using PGT-P like this
Yeah.
to choose traits that aren't about health,
Right.
how would that change how we see parenthood,
Wow.
diversity,
Yeah.
what it even means to be human?
Those are huge questions.
Imagine a world where parents feel like they have to.
Yeah.
Like they have to choose certain traits for their kids.
Right.
And if they don't,
Yeah.
those kids face prejudice.
It's like those sci-fi stories where everyone's supposed to be perfect.
Exactly.
And if you don't fit in,
Right.
you're like an outcast.
It's a scary thought, and it reminds us that we need wisdom, compassion, a deep respect for human life.
For all its differences.
All of them.
It feels like we're at a crossroads with this technology.
We are.
It could do so much good,
It could
but it could also backfire in a big way.
affect individuals, families, even society as a whole.
It's a lot of responsibility.
It is, and it's on all of us.
So as we learn more about genetics, we
Yeah.
have to talk honestly about what's right and wrong.
You should have those conversations.
And that's what we've tried to do today with this deep dive.
Yes.
To look at PGT-P
Right.
through the lens of Islamic ethics.
Important lens.
To see both sides,
Absolutely.
the good and the bad.
The potential.
And we talked about those 5 principles
You do.
that give us some guidance
They do.
in this whole new world of genetics.
In uncharted territory.
And it's clear that there are no easy answers here.
No easy answers.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
we want to hear from you, our listeners.
What do you think?
How do you think PGT-P would change our world if we used it to choose non-medical traits?
It's a question worth thinking about.
What values should guide us as we explore these new genetic possibilities?
Because the choices we make now
Yeah,
will shape the future.
it's true.
They will.
We'll leave you with this thought.
Okay.
In a world that's obsessed with being perfect.
Right.
Maybe the best thing we can do for future generations is let them be themselves,
Let them be.
with all their flaws and quirks and everything else.
It's what makes us human.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.